This episode of the Jerry Paul Podcast is CME eligible.
To claim credit, please go to the CME tab on jerrypal.org.
Welcome to the Jerry Paul Podcast. This is Eric Woodera.
This is Alex Smith.
And Alex, today we're going to be talking about nutrition and aging, optimizing nutrition and aging. Who do we have with us on this podcast today?
We are delighted to welcome Anna Pleet, who did her medical training in Italy and is now doing internal medicine residency in the United States. And she is on YouTube at Anna Pleet MD. Anna, welcome to the Jerry Paul Podcast.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
And we're delighted to welcome Emily Johnston, who's a registered dietitian and research assistant professor of medicine at NYU. Emily, welcome to the Jerry Paul Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And we're delighted to welcome back Elizabeth Eckstrom, who's a geriatrician extraordinaire and professor of medicine at OHSU, that's Oregon Health Sciences University, and whose new book is The Gift of Aging. Elizabeth, welcome back to Jerry Pal.
Thank you, Alex. Glad to be here again.
So we got a lot to cover on nutrition and aging, but before we jump into that, we always have a song request. Elizabeth, I think you have the song request.
She's embarrassed to say it.
I'm completely embarrassed, but the song I came up with was Cheeseburger in Paradise.
Why are you embarrassed? This is our second Jimmy Buffett song, isn't it?
The late, great Jimmy Buffett. I think
I'm
he died in memoriam even.
In memoriam.
I'm not even going to be able to sing along. I don't know the words, but go for it. I'd love to hear you.
What? In college, I worked security for Jimmy Buffett's concert in Orange County.
Did
I
you
remember
really?
That, yeah.
With the
there
parrot
was
heads.
So much smoke in that.
I could imagine.
I would say what's in that smoke, but there was a lot of smoke. What other song do we do for Jimmy Buffett?
We did one recently. I don't remember.
I remember talking about the parrot heads.
Yeah.
All right, let's hear it, Alex. Okay.
Tried to amend my carnivorous habits. Made it nearly 70 days. Losing weight without speed, eating sunflower seeds. Drinking lots of carrot juice and soaking up rays. But at night I'd have these wonderful dreams. Some kind of sensuous treat. Not zucchini, fettuccine, or bulk of wheat. But a big warm bun and a huge chunk of meat. Cheeseburger in paradise. Heaven on earth with an onion slice. Not too particular, not too precise. I'm a cheeseburger in paradise.
It starts off very apropos to what we're going to be talking about.
Eating
and then
sunflower seeds,
carrot
zucchini,
juice.
bulgur wheat. But
it kind of swerves off into a particular
cheeseburger.
direction. Okay. So I got to ask, I'm going to start off this. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this. So we're going to be talking about optimizing nutrition and aging. How important is it? Like I'm about to be 50 years old. I feel like my diet is like I'm paying attention to my diet a lot more now, eating a lot more fruits and vegetables, taking in more fiber, doing a lot of things. How important is it that we also think about that when people are in their 70s, 80s? They've been eating probably the same diet for 70 or 80 years. Like, why change now?
It's never too late. It's ideal to have a good, healthy, balanced diet through your whole life, but it's never too late. And you can work at different levels of prevention. So if you already have a condition, you might be able to prevent events. You could improve quality of life, have better bowel habits, less constipation. You can have short-term things as well as long-term things at any age. So it's never too late. And, based on our song choice, if people are dreaming about a big juicy cheeseburger because they're really depriving themselves during the day, that's not balance either. So, there's an argument for having balance throughout life, and that's important at any age.
All things in moderation, including moderation.
I love that line.
Yogi Berra one-upping the Buddha.
And I'm going to turn to you. Same question from your thoughts, because you actually have a YouTube channel that focused on like public education around this. Do you know if is your audience mostly younger people, older people, mixed? Do you know much about your audience?
Yeah. So to answer your question,
I know a lot about my audience thanks to YouTube's back end algorithm, gives you all these analytics, and it tells you a lot more about your audience than you probably want to know, to be honest. I'm glad that you ended the question with that, because that's really what drew me into realizing that this is a much bigger topic than I realized when I first started making YouTube videos teaching about healthy eating, the Mediterranean diet specifically, and just healthy lifestyle practices. More than 50% of my YouTube audience is age 65 plus. Like, that's a lot of people in that cohort who are on YouTube, which I didn't realize. And I thought, okay, it makes sense just as time goes on. More and more people are on YouTube in general. So, hey, people are getting their grandparents involved or their aunts and uncles saying, oh, I think I know someone who you might like to follow. They're this influencer. And so people are getting hooked into it. But on their own, people are also using YouTube specifically, but social media as its own search engine. It's not just Google anymore. It's people want to see a video and somebody explaining to them this thing that they're confused about. And one of the classic things people are confused about, I think, is how to eat healthy. So it just made sense to kind of bring that all together. But at any age, like as Emily said, it is so important to pay attention to nutrition and healthy eating, because it's not just about, chronic disease prevention or even treatment and management. You feel better in the moment. So it doesn't matter how old you are, feeling good helps you have a better quality of life. And I think that's something that we can really focus on, especially with geriatric patients. They really need that.
Yeah, and I love your videos too, because for myself, I liked watching them to see like, what actually goes into a Mediterranean diet? Like what would a breakfast look like? I just watched a video of you kind of going through a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, just seeing what a breakfast could look like in a Mediterranean diet. We'll have a link to that video and to the YouTube page too, which I thought, again, was absolutely fabulous.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good question. I know Elizabeth has a lot of information about the way to structure the Mediterranean diet. When I was a medical student, I actually worked with Elizabeth in her research group at OHSU. And so we did like a little project about it. And I think she'll probably be able to fill in the details. But I realized there's not just one Mediterranean diet, which makes sense because there's also not just one vegan diet. Vegan is a little bit more clear cut of you don't eat these things. So by default, you're eating all the rest of the stuff.
Whereas there's a lot of Mediterranean countries.
That's the point, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't appreciate that until I lived in Italy. And that's where I did medical school for 6 years. And I thought, okay, we have the Italian version. We have the Spanish version. We have the North African version. We have the Turkish version. We have the Greek version. They don't all agree, but the commonalities between them are the things that are healthy. So I realized, okay, it can be kind of a malleable concept. And for any diet, we can really tweak it to an individual's preferences, their needs, that kind of thing.
And Elizabeth, you just wrote a book. What was the title of the book again?
It's called The Gift of Aging.
The Gift of Aging. And what do you say in your book about nutrition and aging?
Well, I say it's pretty much the key to life. Certainly between nutrition and exercise, if everybody did that well, they would live much longer, be much healthier. Emily said it can start right away. It's so true. And Eric, you're hitting that magic number 50. I have to say I'm hitting the magic number 60 along with you. So we're starting to see some of those changes of aging. And I think that, getting started early is great. I'll just throw out this kind of fun little term that a lot of people haven't learned before. It's called hormesis. And hormesis is when something is a little bit acerbic or, it's a little bit poisonous to you. But if you eat it over and over again, you get used to it and your body builds up resilience. And vegetables and fruits have a little bit of hormesis to them. So they're a little bit toxic to our systems. And as we build up resilience, it makes our immune system stronger. It just makes us stronger in general. And you want to start fairly early. And I can add on, there's this fascinating research on the microbiome, which I'm sure you've all read about quite a bit. But they say that people at midlife, kind of our age, can have a gut midlife crisis. And we can start to really go downhill with our GI system. And as Emily mentioned, the constipation, those kinds of things. And if you eat, and this is more prebiotics than probiotics, but things like garlic and asparagus, if you eat those things, you can overcome that midlife crisis and kind of have your aging gut age well with you. And then, the microbiome itself, just give me a guess. If you start eating the Mediterranean diet, how long does it take to change your microbiome from an unhealthy microbiome to a healthy microbiome? Alex, you guessed too. Eric and Alex, both of you giving me a guess.
What is a healthy microbiome versus unhealthy? I'm going to go off.
Well, no, we got to answer the question.
I don't know what I'm answering.
I'm going 3 months.
3 months for what?
To change the microbiome.
To change the microbiome.
From unhealthy to healthy.
The gut bacteria from
the gut
bad bacteria to good bacteria.
I'm going to say a year.
3 weeks.
Wow.
So you asked the question, isn't the horse already out of the barn, right? But really, you can be 85, you can be 95. It only takes 3 weeks to make your gut healthier. And when you tell your patients that, they're like, what? You're kidding. So it's just a really good kind of starting place around some of this information of what you're actually doing when you do the Mediterranean diet.
Okay. I'm gonna play the cynic here. If it is so amazingly good, it only takes 3 weeks and you feel better and you maybe lose weight, your microbiome changes. Do we have a lot of randomized controlled trials that doing a diet like the Mediterranean diet improves all of those outcomes?
Oh boy, that is such an easy question to answer, Eric. There's so much evidence out there. So
really,
there are big randomized trials like PrettyMed in Europe, and Anna will talk some more in a moment because she spent so much time over there. But there's excellent randomized trial data on the benefits of Mediterranean diet for cardiovascular risk reduction, for stroke risk reduction, for dementia risk reduction, for diabetes risk reduction, for depression risk reduction, for pain and osteoarthritis. Go on, Anna. What are some of the others?
Yeah, actually, I was seeing a study for PCOS. Now, there's evidence for some more specialized hormonal conditions. I think what Elizabeth's touching on is there's actually so much evidence, and that's why it's almost funny that this is not something more well understood and disseminated. I had the same kind of aha moment, and Elizabeth helped me think through this while I was in school, and we were talking about, we both obviously love food and diet, and we thought, there's like a missing piece, and there's so much research. Like, I think there's a lot of evidence. I don't know if the world needs more bigger RCTs just about something like the Med diet. But I started to see like, okay, well, if this is so great, why is it not maybe more top of line for like treatment protocols? And why is it not more well understood? Well, part of what I said before, where there's more than one, like, for example, Mediterranean diet is actually like topic. It's not that specific. It doesn't mean you must eat 2 tablespoons of olive oil on 2 cups of lettuce, and then here's your chicken. Like, it doesn't have to look like that. So the practicality of actually running a trial is tricky when it's hard to fit it all into a box, obviously. And notoriously, I think this is really in Emily's wheelhouse more, but like diet research is inherently challenging for so many reasons beyond studying one thing at a time, because you're not studying one thing at a time and you're not looking for just one outcome. And so a lot of the research is very preventive. So it's like, we have all this evidence for the prevention of X, Y, and Z chronic condition, because that's easier to kind of deal with. But looking... Or
like a pill like Ozempic, where you can give it, charge, several $1,000s a month.
Yeah. The time it takes to look at chronic disease prevention or outcomes is just, it's in the word chronic. It takes time. So those are expensive studies to run in the first place. Emily, you probably have a lot more to say just about the research alone.
Yeah, and there's no big pharma company that's going to rake in all that money based on the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah, it's hard to get funding for big nutrition studies, but we do have a lot of great evidence. And one of the really fantastic programs and studies that we have is the diabetes prevention program. So the first diabetes prevention program was published in 2002. So diabetes prevention programs have been going on for over 20 years. And this is especially important for older adults because the program is a year long and it's a lifestyle change program. And something great about it is that it's flexible. So it's actually not based specifically on the Mediterranean diet. It's more about balance and cooking more at home and learning to read labels and being active. It's the whole lifestyle picture. But for adults over 60 who completed the program, they reduced the risk of diabetes by 70%. So we have some really great evidence for lifestyle interventions for chronic disease prevention.
Oh, yeah, Emily, I got a question for you. So I'm hearing, and I'd love to talk about specific diets and maybe the evidence for them. But before we do that, how should we ask about this in our clinics? Not just about, like, we think in geriatrics training, it was about, like, you had one category about, like, obesity and one category about inadvertent weight loss. But we don't talk a lot about, like, healthy nutrition in the middle. Do we ask about that?
I vote for yes. I think if you bring it up, the patient sees that it's really important to their health. And
how do we bring it up?
One option is the using the 5 A's. So is it okay if we talk about what you eat today? And so you ask permission first. You can also put it into, as you're discussing other, like at an annual visit, like, oh, have you been sleeping well? Have you been vaccinated? Oh, and what are you eating these days? And so there are screeners, lots of validated screeners, but there's also the option to just say, do you eat one or more servings of fruit each day? Do you eat one or more servings of vegetables each day? Do you consume sugar-sweetened beverages?
I've always been a little bit confused, though, about the servings. Do most people know what a serving of vegetable? No, I'm seeing a shake.
Yeah,
No.
I get this question on my YouTube channel a lot.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to make a video.
If you look at the dietary guidelines, it's actually a little bit confusing. It's like 1 cup equivalent is like raw versus cooked versus juiced.
Like I just had a whole apple. Does that count as a serving?
Pretty much. So like a rule of thumb is you could use your fists. Like this is the medium size apple. So that's 1 serving of fruit. So you can do the sort of shortcuts. There you go.
I was holding up an apple for our listeners.
Oh yeah. So you can use your fist for a serving of carbohydrates or a medium piece of fruit. A handful is like a serving of almonds or other nuts. So you can use some of these shortcuts. You don't have to have a measuring cup necessarily, but you could tell people 1/2 cup to a cup is a serving of fruit, and same for vegetables. You want to have 2 or more of each of those in a day. But you don't have to do full nutrition counseling with your patients. You're not dietitians. We want you to refer your patients to us. But if you just start that discussion with them and say, hey, you're starting metformin today, for example, it will really help that to work for you in the long term if you take more steps each day, try to drink more water and less soda, try to eat more fruits and vegetables and less snack foods. So you can just really be very, very general, but just have that discussion so they see it's part of their plan of care.
Elizabeth, how do you bring it up in your clinic?
I typically bring it up on the very first day I meet people because
really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Up to the front of the line.
Yep. What's your diet like? What do you do for exercise? Have you done your advanced care planning and a few other things? But diet is right at the top of the list. And I'll be like, what do you usually have for breakfast? What do you usually have for lunch? What do you usually have for dinner? What do you eat in between? And we'll kind of go through and I'll be like, well, how's that feeling to you? Is it feeling pretty healthy, or are there things we could talk about? And I mean, you know me, I have opinions about everything, right? So I'm like, oh, those bacon and eggs that you're having every morning, that's going to kill you. And you know what? It's not going to kill you very long from now. So we start talking about, what they're doing. What are some things that would be a little bit better if they're eating bacon every morning? We'll switch them to some turkey bacon, and just start making gradual changes. But I try to get my patients to kind of go all the way, as Anna saw when she was working with me. I mean, we're into the lentils and roasted vegetables and just really getting into the plant-based diet. And I'm constantly working with my patients to try to get at least 70% of their protein from plant-based sources so that they have a, really mostly plant-based diet and are getting plenty of protein in their diet. And, sometimes my whole session we'll spend time talking just about diet and exercise. And they'll be like, wait a minute, you didn't talk about my diabetes or my heart failure or my COPD. And I'm like, well, if you do diet and exercise, those things are not going to matter anymore.
Well, I guess the other question is, like, when we're thinking about for like older adults, being overweight is not good for your health. Being underweight is not good for your health. There's this thought like there's a J-shaped curve as far as mortality. And when we look at prognostic indices too, like being very underweight and losing weight is a bad sign for older adults. How do you incorporate things like energy balance into talking with patients? Emily?
Yeah, so just thinking about the diabetes prevention program as an example, because that is where I'm doing a lot of my research right now, we talk to patients about slow, consistent weight loss. We don't want them losing more than really a half a pound a week at the most. And so we talk to them about maintenance and, slow progress. So they do some diet tracking, some they'll have either a paper food record or they'll use an app to keep track of their diet just for a short time. They don't have to do it for the whole year, but it gives them an idea of what they're eating. And then we show them some recommendations for energy intake for their age and weight and activity level. And we do some comparisons. But you're not recommending that these patients cut 1,000 calories. We're doing very, very small changes, particularly with older adults, because we're concerned about muscle loss and we want them to lose weight really gradually.
Yeah. And I also get this. First of all, I think all three of you, would it be fair to say you're proponents of a Mediterranean diet? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we're nodding. Yeah.
But it's also hard because diet implies for a lot of people like something you do to lose weight. But I also get a sense, like watching your YouTube videos, Anna, is it's not necessarily like a diet. It's a way of life. Mm-hmm. Like part of the diet is actually the socialization that comes with just sitting at the table around food that is good for you and healthy and encourages socialization, which is important for older adults. Is diet the right word I should be using?
I love this question because it touches on one of my buttons that gets pressed. It's such a misnomer, Mediterranean diet, and I'll tell you a story that really clarifies this. So this was when I was probably I was in my fourth year of medical school. Now, training outside of the US and Canada is usually a 6-year program. So fourth year is where you start your clinicals. So I was on rotations, and there were two things that happened simultaneously that both were like, what is going on? The first was that I was training in Italy, where is, the capital of the Mediterranean, let's say. It's food-centric culture. And Milan, where I was specifically, is also really a hub for the rest of the country. So a lot of the time, specifically for medical care, because the north of Italy has some of the best technology, people are coming from the south. They're coming from the islands for their surgeries or for their rare disease consultations or their specialty follow-ups for really advanced or difficult cases. And I was shocked at the number of patients that were asking the doctor, what should I eat? And I'm thinking, wait, you guys are the Mediterranean diet and lifestyle. You don't need to ask because you're doing it already. They don't even realize it. So that was sort of a wake-up moment for me where I thought, okay, there's confusion everywhere in the world in general about diet. That's the first point. The second thing that happened was once I started really getting into the Italian culture more, and I was able to converse with nurses and other students in Italian, I really got to connect with the way they think a lot better, which happens whenever you speak a local language with somebody, you see a whole different side of them. And it was crazy to me how many people, Europeans, not just Italians, but general Europeans, had never heard of, for example, the Mediterranean diet. And I thought, this doesn't make any sense. You guys made it up. Like, this is the stuff. Like, all the research has come out of this region to show all of this benefit to our health, and you guys have never heard of it. So I thought, wait a second, how did this come about? And that's when I started studying more formally, what is the Mediterranean diet? Because You don't get that in your medical training. Like nobody sits down and is like, these are the healthy, evidence-based dietary recommendations that we should probably be focusing on when we have conversations with patients. Like that lesson doesn't happen. I don't know whose medical training has that course. And if so, please share with the rest of us. But I realized, okay, so we don't even know what it is over here in the Mediterranean region. So what are we talking about? So if you look at the literature, you're going to see these very regimented, kind of like clear-cut components of a Mediterranean diet. And what are those things? It's a mostly, or if not all, whole foods, plant-based diet that also includes a good amount of animal proteins, mostly coming from fish, about 2 to 3 times a week, and then eggs and dairy, ideally high protein dairy, typical dairy that you would see, Greek yogurt, ricotta cheese, mozzarella, but not necessarily a lot of butter. That's not really even considered dairy. If you look at it nutritionally, it's really just an oil. And then at the less amount eaten, but still included, is things like poultry. And then the least amount is red meat and sweets. So there's a nice pyramid that people can look up. And if you want, you can put the link in the show notes because I think it'll be useful for people. There's a group, Old Ways in Boston, and they teach this really well. So they have like a little Mediterranean diet pyramid and it shows you all the components. And that's sort of like a nice foundation to teach people and use it as a visual aid of like, okay, this is what's supposed to be inside of the Mediterranean diet. But when you take a step backwards and realize, where did this all come from? This was not an approach to eating that was theorized and then deduced. It was observed in reality, the way people live over hundreds of years, honestly, thousands of years in some places like Sardinia, for example. And it works. And it works because it's survived for so long. But the funny thing, and this is like a classic myth of the Mediterranean diet, it's like, it's too expensive. Well, the irony is that this diet resurrected from the poorest communities in the Mediterranean region. So it is rice and lentils and beans and vegetables that grew seasonally and fish because they lived by the sea. And that was more available and affordable than getting something like red meat or having your own farm. I mean, picture 1,000 years ago, people eating. So,
and I also imagine that, like, even when you think about Italy, is that there's a big difference between what they eat like in Sardinia, right, versus what they may be eating in other places, even like Milan.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And like when we think of the prototypical Mediterranean diet, like I think about like Sardinia and that area, like the people really farm to table stuff, lots of fish, lots of vegetables.
This is it. I had an amazing opportunity of being an au pair in a summer in Sardinia. So I lived with a family there. And that's where I actually really learned this stuff. I was not learning it in Milan because Milan has Five Guys, they have Burger King. Like, people are into that now.
Germanic influences up in.
Let's call it Alpine. Yeah, I'm biased because I also used to live in Germany, so I do like Germany. But anyway, the point is, there's a lot of variance, and if you think about what the poorest people can afford, it's likely more Mediterranean. Yeah, that's honestly the easiest way for me to.
And you actually did that, right, with Elizabeth? You actually looked in grocery stores around the Portland area, looked at accessibility, cost, and how hard it was to cook. Was that what you looked at? If I'm remembering your AGS talk?
Yep.
Tell us about that, Elizabeth.
Anna went out to the grocery stores and with another one of our research assistants at the time, and they bought, a bag of lentils for 89 cents, enough to, cook for like 10 meals and bok choy and, various things that were really inexpensive, and put together a whole bunch of meals that were like $8 for 4 people for this delicious meal. And so it was really inexpensive. And we overlaid, we took the map of the lowest income neighborhoods in Portland and the neighborhoods in Portland that had the highest percentage of older adults. So we overlaid resource poor neighborhoods with the oldest neighborhoods. And we shopped at the grocery stores. They shopped at the grocery stores. I didn't go with them, right in those exact neighborhoods. And that's where they found all these ingredients that were totally Mediterranean diet and really inexpensive. And I mean, olive oil in the US is a little bit of a misnomer because it's hard to get super cheap olive oil. I actually, when I was preparing for this, I went out to the grocery outlet or whatever it's called, like the cheapo place, and they actually had some pretty cheap olive oil. So it's not like it doesn't exist, but it's a little bit harder to find cheap olive oil, especially when you're buying extra virgin, which we certainly do recommend. But it's just a matter of cooking. I mean, you cook up some lentils, you add some garlic and onion and some red pepper and fresh spinach, or you can even use frozen spinach, and your meal costs $1, and it's absolutely delicious and so incredibly healthy for you.
Going to your house for dinner tonight, Elizabeth.
Yeah, come on over. It's going to be farro and roasted vegetables and toasted pumpkin seeds.
All right, Emily, I got to ask you a question. We're talking a lot about Mediterranean diet. Where do the other diets, your DASH diets, your keto diets, give me another diet, Alex.
There are a lot of people who are doing the intermittent fasting.
Do you recommend a specific diet like Mediterranean? Do you see what they're like? Tailored to I'm guessing you're going to say tailored to the person, but how do you think about all these different diets?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And just to go back to your previous question for a second, I recently talked to some patients on an advisory board, and they said, don't ask me about my diet, ask me about the foods I eat. So just in terms of like terminology, you can also say plan. In research, we're saying dietary patterns more now than diet, but patients don't necessarily want to hear about that. So either plan or, think about which foods you should have more of and which foods you should have less of. That can be helpful. In terms of the dietary patterns that I would recommend for or against, Mediterranean, absolutely lots of evidence, and a lot of really simple, inexpensive recipes like Elizabeth was talking about and like Anna experienced. And the MIND diet is a focus of one of my research studies right now, the Mediterranean DASH intervention for neurodegenerative delay. It's quite a mouthful, but it's a combination of the DASH diet and the MIND diet. And it's really focused on neuroprotective foods. So it has olive oil, it has berries, it has dark leafy greens. It's really focused on carotenoids, which are the bioactive pigments in fruits and vegetables that protect your heart and your brain. And so we have the MIND diet. It's in the news a little bit more. People are talking about it for dementia prevention because we have a lot of evidence showing that it is associated with lower cognitive age. So again, good evidence, really simple and straightforward messaging you can give patients. You don't have to. Are there
studies looking at whether or not it decreases risk for dementia?
Yeah. So studies out of Rush have been coming out about this. And Martha Claire Morris has been talking about the MIND diet now for, I think, since like 2012. So she's got some really great research about the MIND diet and how it really does protect against cognitive decline. But as we know, it's not just your diet, right? It's your whole lifestyle. And like in the Mediterranean diet, socialization and, eating together and moving more, all these things contribute. But if you focus on these foods that are protective of your heart and brain, you may have a lower risk of chronic disease in the future. There's very little long-term evidence of the ketogenic diet or paleo diet or any of these diets that are really high in animal protein. And they're not recommended by any of our scientific bodies, except in like extreme cases like in epilepsy. It's been shown to be beneficial in certain cases, but for long-term health and chronic disease prevention, there's really no evidence for that. And I'll just make one comment about intermittent fasting, and that is, as long as you're intermittent fasting when you're eating something healthy. Some people eat on different schedules, and I don't object to that, but I think from personal and patient experience, I've found that some people do intermittent fasting and eat nothing but mashed potatoes in a day, because they can eat whatever they want as long as it's in this 4-hour window. Yeah, and so that's the misconception that concerns me.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions. Our listeners may also be curious. What is farro?
High protein grain. It's an ancient grain that is absolutely delicious. It's also called spelt. especially in Europe. It might have that name instead of farro or farro. And it is, you can put anything in it. I mean, I was in Italy and had this delicious salad that was a spelt salad, cold. It was a cold salad that had arugula, fresh tomatoes, and a bunch of olive oil. And just that combination was so absolutely delightful. You can't beat using those whole grains for things. And so I already cooked some this morning. I cook something like that practically every day just to kind of add my protein, get my whole grains into my vegetables. Whatever I'm doing with the vegetables, a salad, roasted vegetables, those kinds of things, I'll add one of those ancient grains to it.
All right, my wife's
or lentils, legumes.
I'm half Asian. My wife's full Asian. We have rice like 2 to 3 times a day, every day. How do you feel about rice?
Is it whole grain?
We usually mix the white and the brown rice, though the kids try and up the proportion of white rice, whereas my wife and I try and up the proportion of brown rice when we make it.
When I met my husband, one of the first meals he cooked for me had like this white sushi rice, and I was like, "Darling, if we're going to be together, we got to get rid of the sushi rice." but it's a great question because we talk about Mediterranean, but really there are a lot of places in Japan that are eating exactly the same diet. Now they're all dying of stroke because they add soy sauce, and that's really gives really high salt, so it can make a huge difference. And I have to take all my Japanese patients off of their soy to get their blood pressure under control. But it's there's so many fresh vegetables and they're just cooked quickly, and the Japanese blue zone eats like 60% of their diet is these purple yams. Emily might remember the exact name of them, but we eat garnet yams, kind of the reddish ones, and they're delicious too. But these purple yams have so much health benefits to them. I think they taste a little more mealy.
Can I ask? You brought up blue zone. Are blue zones those areas where you have like Sardinia, like high populations of people who live a very long time? Is that right?
Over 100. The highest, 5 of them, the highest populations in the world of people living over 100. And guess what? Here I am asking you a question again. Guess what the rate of dementia in the blue zones are? Most centenarians in the entire world, what is their rate of dementia?
In 100-year-olds?
Yeah. 100
I don't know.
20%.
35.
Less than 10.
Wow. That's amazing.
So one of them is in Japan, right? And one of them is in Costa Rica. So it doesn't have to just be Mediterranean. I mean, the Costa Rican diet is so incredibly healthy. They have so many fruits and vegetables in it. And so you can eat many different styles of food as long as you kind of stick with these elements of whole grains. And Alex, I'm totally into whole grain rice. You are absolutely fine with your whole grain rice. Just get those kids to, go down
Costa
on
Rica. And I love Costa Rica too. Pura vida. But okay, another question. How about the fake meat? We love impossible meat. Are we getting any health benefits by having the plant-based meat? It's plants, right?
But it's processed, right? And I have no idea what the answer to this question is. So Emily and Anna, please.
Well, I'll just give one example, and that is the Impossible Whopper is really quite similar to the regular Whopper in terms of calories, sodium, and even saturated fat because it's made with coconut oil, which is a plant oil, but it's saturated fat. So you can use it occasionally, but I don't recommend using processed plant-based foods on a regular basis because it's very salty and it has some ingredients we don't love.
Okay, I got another question. Then I want to go to the practicalities of like, what does a breakfast, lunch? Because we often do that, like, oh, just tell me how to treat like neuropathic pain with what medicine. We're going to do the same, but with food. But before we do that, I got to ask about supplements like Ensure. Emily, what do you do with that? Because it's used by so many older adults.
So many, yeah.
Yes.
And I don't think it's part of the Sardinian diet. Is that right, Anna?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to get extra protein and calories. And for people that have difficulty preparing their foods or need some kind of ready to eat food, that might be a great solution. but it's not the number one choice. We always recommend food first. So, I mean, you could have somebody somebody having like a peanut butter sandwich on whole grain bread, and that's got, a few hundred calories. It's got healthy fat. It's got protein. So if they're able to prepare something, even something small, they could make themselves a shake at home. But if your patient is not able to do those things, I wouldn't say don't have Ensure. That might be a great solution for them. But if they have family support or they're able to make some foods from scratch at home, that would be preferable.
And when you think about nuts, because we brought up peanut butter, do you think about nuts as like a big category, or are there specific nuts? I'm kind of nuts about nuts right now. My own diet that you look at, like pistachios, walnuts, almonds.
Yeah, walnuts. There's the most research for walnuts and almonds, but all nuts have healthy fat and plant-based protein and fiber. Don't get the honey roasted ones is my usual number one suggestion.
Oh, I love those.
and actually, like dark chocolate covered nuts are a great dessert, but they're not like necessarily like a healthy snack food. But having a couple of those as a dessert is a great way to have something sweet that's not too unhealthy. But yeah, I think, especially if you're buying natural nut butter, so there's no added sugar or palm oil or anything like that in there, really great. And peanut butter is just fine too.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Anna. Go ahead.
Something that a lot of people don't know is that when you have kidney failure, you have to decrease the nuts that you eat. And that's when peanuts are great, because peanuts are legumes, and you can eat those like into stage 5 CKD, where you have to stop some of the other nuts before that. So
is that because of potassium content?
I don't think it's terrible.
Oh,
I think it's phosphorus, but
phosphorus in the nuts. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go with breast tax. Breakfasts. And I'm going to start off with you. Give me like an example or what you had for breakfast today. Like, what does a Mediterranean diet look like from a breakfast standpoint?
It's a great question. There's not only one correct answer.
Yeah.
I will also say, before I give you this is the healthy version, if you actually go to the Mediterranean region, like looking around at the bar, people are not eating this way often. They're eating this way in their houses, but not in the cafe.
Yeah.
It is not the coffee with the milk and the sugar and the cream.
And the pastry.
And the pastry and
the
croissant. Yeah, we love that. Obviously, who doesn't love that? But that's not like a Mediterranean diet breakfast, it's a Mediterranean breakfast. So,
but give me your favorite.
Whole produce form. If you like sweet, have a piece of fruit. If you need savory, go with vegetables. A source of protein. So on the sweet side, that could be like a Greek yogurt is the classic.
Yeah.
I also enjoy a lot of cottage cheese. It's very high in protein. Or if you like the savory side of things, eggs are the easiest go-to. And pretty much every variation of the Mediterranean diet has an egg dish for breakfast. So it's a safe choice. And then some kind of a whole grain or green. If you can't do from whole form, because people aren't usually eating rice or flour for breakfast, I think having a whole grain bread or a cracker is totally fine. Or even a rice cake. When I'm in a rush, I eat a rice cake. Like, there's nothing wrong with a rice cake. Sometimes that's the best you can do. So yeah, that'd be like a good breakfast. Like a piece of produce, focus on the protein, something that is fibrous, ideally from a whole grain, or just extra vegetables.
Yeah.
Cottage cheese is healthy? Wait.
As long as you don't get the full fat version.
As long as you get the fruit on the bottom version. I have to say, I think I have a slightly different perspective than a lot of nutrition professionals on this, but I'm not that concerned about one food, like in someone's diet. If someone's like, that's my thing, that I need that full fat flavor, I'm like, okay, let's talk about the whole thing. And so
it's okay for me to have that cheeseburger occasionally.
Well, we're talking about a meal there, but yeah, but honestly, totally. And like, that's built into, I think, any healthy diet regimen. You want to have a good balance. Otherwise, you're not going to stick with it. It becomes too diet-like and not lifestyle-like.
Yeah. Okay,
Emily, I think, had a comment on my idea that I'm now going to eat cottage cheese regularly.
Well, I actually also would be more concerned about the fruit on the bottom than the whole fat, because that it's just like a bunch of syrup. So if you're eating like one serving of cottage cheese with some fresh blueberries, that's a great breakfast. Very high in protein. You get your fruit. If you don't hate reduced fat cottage cheese, that's a better option, sure. But like Anna said, I mean, that is the approach of nutrition professionals. Like, if you love cottage cheese, yes, eat it. How healthy can we make it? What's the healthiest version of it that you can eat and still enjoy? That's the goal.
Elizabeth, when you're talking with patients, like if you're giving them like one of your ideal, like get them excited about a lunch, Mediterranean diet lunch, what would that look like?
Yeah. So again, I'll go back to some hearty greens, spinach, kale, chard, something like that. Have them put some cooked farro or cooked lentils on it. Add some, red peppers, toasted pine nuts, toasted pumpkin seeds, toasted, toasted walnuts, and then just a little bit of olive oil and maybe some seasoned rice vinegar and salt and pepper, and good to go. It's a fantastic lunch. If you don't have that much time, I'll go back to, I eat low fat cottage cheese. I love it. Now I'll add some fresh tomatoes to that. I'll add some spinach, chop up a little spinach, chop up a little shallot, just put that in and you get your plenty of protein. But really having some of those cooked lentils or whole grains that you can just add into anything, you're going to get your protein source, and it tastes just absolutely delicious. People love it.
All right, Emily, you talked about mind diet. Give me a good mind diet dinner.
Sure. So
convince me to do the mind diet based on the most delicious dinner you can think of on a mind diet.
So think about your plate. You're going to divide it in half. Half of it's going to be vegetables, a quarter of it's going to be protein, and a quarter of it's going to be a carbohydrate. So I love salmon, and any kind of fatty fish is on the Mediterranean and the Mind diet. So we're going to have some salmon. We're going to have some quinoa because it cooks really fast. And we're going to have a nice sauteed spinach with lemon and olive oil and chickpeas.
I love that. So wait. Half of the plate is vegetables. Does fruit fall into that too? Like that? No, vegetables.
Just vegetables.
A quarter of it is your protein.
Yep.
And then a quarter of it is carbohydrates. Give me some other examples of carbohydrates I can put in there.
Sure. So farro, like Elizabeth mentioned.
God, the farro again, Alex.
Rice is also a carbohydrate. And again, it's a quarter of your plate. So if rice is your food, you can't give up. You can eat it. Just put it on the quarter of the plate. Don't make it the focus of the meal. Yeah. Bread, potato, those beautiful purple yams Elizabeth mentioned. You can have fruit as the carbohydrate in your meal if you prefer not to have a starch. So that's another option as well. Let's see, did I miss any? If it's breakfast or if you love oatmeal is a carbohydrate. It's nice and high in fiber, and you can have that at any meal.
Great. All right, Anna, you've done a lot of videos on this. Which are the meals that you get the most feedback, like, or do you get feedback like, this was a great meal, I did this today, loved it?
People really appreciate the fact that I'm talking about pasta. I can't not.
How do you talk about Mediterranean diet and not talk about pasta?
I think I actually had a lot of fun making my video about like the research on pasta, because I learned a lot just in going to the literature and trying to figure out like, what is the evidence for pasta? There's so much misconception about like what pasta does for our body or blood glucose and what it doesn't.
Is pasta good or bad?
I'd say it's great. And I can tell you there are millions of people out there who've been eating this for a long time, and they're doing pretty well.
Quarter of the plate. Quarter of the plate.
Right? Well, I'll say this. It is more typical in an Italian dinner to have a first and then a second course. Yeah. So you have a small plate first. And I have no idea physiologically if that makes a difference by eating.
Yeah, you get your orzo or you get your small.
You'd think it's the other way around, that you'd want to put the protein and the high fiber in there first, but you have the pasta first and then you do the vegetable plus the protein second. That's like a classic Italian dinner in any restaurant wherever you go. So that's also an easy way. If people prefer doing like the first and second course, like they can play around with that.
But how big is the plate of pasta? It's not like when you go out to dinner in the U.S., right? You get pasta like
tiny. What about the all-you-can-eat spaghetti?
Yeah. I was going to say the all-you-can-eat bread sticks.
Yeah.
And I do tell people, get the Italian pasta, the durum semolina, because that flour is a lot healthier than what you get at the cheapo pasta places. And also you can get like chickpea pasta and all sorts of other super healthy pastas that they taste great.
One last question, though. It's also hard not to think of a Mediterranean diet and not think about wine. Where does that fall into it?
Moderation. One glass per day for 1 drink per day for women, 2 drinks per day for men maximum. You can't save them up and have them all on the weekend.
And with the meal. With the meal.
And some of the newer research now is saying both men and women should limit to about 3 drinks per week. So it's not a super high amount of wine.
Red, white wine, doesn't matter. Depends on what you eat. Perfect. That's spoken like an Italian.
Yes.
Like
With the food, obviously.
Duh. Yeah, Alex, what goes with a cheeseburger in paradise?
Onion slice and mustard, medium rare with mustard would be nice. Here we go. Tried to amend my carnivorous habits. Made it nearly 70 days. Losing weight without speed, eating sunflower seeds. Drinking lots of carrot juice and soaking up rays. But at night I'd have these wonderful dreams. Some kind of sensuous treat. Not zucchini, fettuccine, or bulgur wheat, but a big wonton and a huge chunk of meat. Singing cheeseburger in paradise. Heaven on earth with an onion slice. Not too particular, not too precise. I'm a cheeseburger in paradise.
And Alex, I can tell you, I've got a zucchini fettuccine recipe that is to die for. Love it.
Well, I want to thank all 3 of you for being on this podcast. That was so great. I learned a ton. Encourage everybody also to check out that YouTube site and buy Elizabeth's book. What's it called again?
Gift of Aging. Thank you.
Gift of Aging.
Gift of Aging. And thank you to all of I can't even talk anymore. Thank you to all of our listeners for your continued support. And we'd also like to thank our donors who've donated more than $250, including
Nina Flanagan, Penelope Thompson, Lloyd Woolstat, Mark Wren, Carol Heyman, Bob Rixey, Patrick Lally, Matt Schuster, James Tulsky, Annie Hargadon, Jeffrey Galbraith, Daryl Owens, Meg Walhagen, Susan Nelson, Sharon Bragman, Harry Hahn, Jessica McFarland, Victoria Braun, Diane Meyer, Mike Steinman and Dorothy Richmond, Wendy Peltier, Kelly Strait, Craig China, Ron Saber, Rebecca Goldstein, and Elizabeth Chung.
And again, those are the ones who've donated more than $250 in the last year. If you're interested in donating, click on the little donate button. Or if you just want to share our podcast on other podcasting platforms or Twitter or any other social media sites, that's good too.
And if I mispronounced your name, please shoot me an email. I will correct it the next time we record one of these. Thank you.